It's a beautiful, foggy October day here at Dillon Beach in Sonoma County. And in this video, I am working on an acrylic plein air painting of the coast with these beautiful rocks and the fog. Overcast weather is such a great time to paint, so I'm excited to get painting. Hello, love, welcome. My name is Jennifer Laurel Keller. I'm an acrylic and mixed media artist and instructor, and this is the Wild at Art Show. And if you're excited about today's painting session at Dillon Beach, hit the like button and let's get into it. All right, so I'm looking for a composition. I'm choosing between these rocks right in front, but for today, I'm going to work on this coastline. So I have burnt sienna on my brush, and the canvas is toned with a wash of burnt sienna as well. And I like to do a burnt sienna wash over the canvas because it creates a nice mid-tone that I can put my darks and lights over the top of. Now I'm sorting out my composition using my brush as a marker to kind of get my bearings. And I'm going to pop in my two main focal points. One is a boulder on the beach, which is to my left. And the other one is part of the cliff rocks that are coming down from the bluffs. And that is going to be on the right at the top. And both of these rocks are on the rule of thirds. So the top rock on the right is 1/3 of the way down the canvas, and the other rock is 1/3 of the way up the canvas. And the rule of thirds helps with just making a nice composition. Now I'm just continuing to sketch out the land that is coming out in the distance. This background piece of land is mostly fogged in the whole time. And just making some adjustments there. Loose sketch. And then I've got my horizon line coming out this way. You can barely see the horizon because of all the fog. It wasn't too cold, and for me it was sweatshirt weather, but a lot of people were hanging out in shorts and t-shirts. There was even a gal who was in a bikini going swimming in the Pacific Ocean. It must have been freezing. Not for me, but it's not quite as cold as it looks. Okay, now I'm putting in a wave pattern, and I just want to get the general perspective of these lines of the waves. I have a little bit of Payne's gray mixed into a lot of white. It's a little bit more blue than the actual fog, but it's just a base coat. So I am just bringing that in loosely on the sky, adding a little bit more white now. And the great thing about painting in overcast weather is that the paint doesn't dry as quickly, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, but it's much more comfortable to be outside in overcast weather, at least for me. I'm kind of sensitive to heat, and so this means that I'm not going to get too hot. I like to be able to layer clothes. I like feeling cozy and layered, and then maybe the sun comes out. It is the coast after all. And if that comes out, I can just, take my sweatshirt off and be in a t-shirt. Okay, so I've got the horizon mostly worked out. And you can see how I adjusted the easel there. It's because the easel wasn't level. And so I just wanted to push one of the legs of the easel down into the sand a little bit more so that I had a better flat leveled easel and I could get that horizon right, because if the horizon is off, it can make the canvas feel a little bit wonky. Okay, so I've taken a very similar color. I think I added just a smidge of green to this but the value is still pretty light, and I'm coming through for the back of the ocean. In the moment, I brought it just a tiny little bit darker, but then looking at it in the camera and looking past the canvas at the actual horizon there, I don't think I really needed to do that. Okay, so I'm bringing this light blue-green down into the mid-ground now. And I can be really loose and free with this. I'm going to do a lot of layering over the top, but I do like to change the color as I approach the beach, because that's kind of how it looks in real life. And there's always like a little bit of a gradient as water gets closer to you, because the light is reflected differently and it's a different depth. You can start to see some of the colors from the sand under the water. Sometimes that's the case. It depends on the light. There's so many variables, but I try and just get it as close as I can to the color that I see. Okay, coming through now with some gray, and this is the land that all day, this little piece of land in the background was in and out of fog, and I had to make a lot of adjustments to it throughout the painting session. This gray mixture is a combination of burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and Payne's gray and white. So everything in the background, as far as land, as it gets closer to you, is going to be cooler and lighter. And then as I move forward, I just don't add as much white to that mix. And then here I am bringing it a little bit darker even still, because I want a subtle change in the difference so that it seems like there is distance in between these two rocks. So I am painting that whole area, that whole piece of rock and cliff in the same color, and I will be coming over it with more color and details later, but this is just for the shadow. And I also leave a little bit of that warmth from the burnt sienna coming through. Any rocks that are out in the water, I make the same color as the shadow color as the piece of land is that is next to the little rocks in the water, if that makes sense. So these far off rocks are the lighter gray that go with the first piece of land that I painted, and the rocks in the mid-ground are the same gray as the second piece of land that I painted. And now I'm bringing in more of the water. And the water was at, it was receding from high tide when I got there. I think high tide was at 11. I got there at about noon. So the water was going out, and I did have to make some changes. Now for the boulder, I'm doing a dark purple. It's not a purple right out of the tube. I think it's Payne's gray and dioxazine purple. And this is because there's more color saturation in the foreground. You can see better. You get darker darks and lighter lights in the foreground and more color saturation. And I like to push that even further than it is in real life and use purple because it just makes things a little bit more interesting, but still very dark. And now I'm coming in with a sand color. The sand is also pretty gray, and it's the same mixture as the rocks and the cliffs. It's yellow ochre, burnt sienna, Payne's gray, and white, but I'm leaning a little bit more towards the yellow ochre, just to give it that sand color. Oh, somebody's got a kite and I didn't even notice. Yep, it was packed. There were so many people. Okay, notice here that I'm coming through with the sand color and I touched down on that wet purple from the boulder. And it actually was a happy accident because it pulled some of that purple into my sand color and created its own little bit of shadow. It just kind of tinted the sand color a little bit purple at the base of that boulder, which I'm not mad about. Okay, now I'm coming back through. There's a little bit of a darker area in the sand, so I mixed more burnt sienna probably into my sand mixture, and I'm coming in and contouring the slope of the sand. And I'll just come around that rock, leaving a little tiny bit of burnt sienna showing through from the base coat, just to give it a little bit more of an interesting glow. All right, and now I'm just leaving a little bit of that gray color from the first layer and having it be my shadow. Adding midtones, and then the highlights are not that light and the shadows are not that dark. It's really, really, really subtle, and you'll be able to see this more so in person. The video, I think it captured it, but it really was more apparent in person. Contouring the shape of the rock, you don't have to get every detail, not every crack, not every little pock and pebble. It's really more about getting the major shapes of the rock at this point. There's a little bit more warmth. I added some burnt sienna to the bottom. And just getting the overall impression of form now. Now, those colors that I was working with will work over on the boulder in front as a midtone, but I can push the spectrum of light on this first boulder a little bit more than the other two because it's closer to me. So you're going to see more contrast in this one, but it is overcast and it's not going to be heavily saturated, although it is more saturated than the other two pieces of land in this painting. All right, so I'm just getting the contour of the boulder in place, and this is just one level up in light. I'm going to come back over this again a couple times to get my highest highlights. But for now, I just want to take it up one notch. Okay, so I added more of the lighter yellow gray. So at this point, I'm just playing with my rocks, getting them to a happy place. And if you look past the canvas at this point, I want you to notice that the horizon is now missing. And so is that third piece of land in the background. And we're going to get back to that. So now adding a little bit more light to my front boulder. Like I said, as promised, we're going to come back over again. And I'm using a little bit shorter brush strokes. Little brush strokes here and there, leaving the cracks exposed with that kind of gray purple. Let's work on this little guy. This rock is an important part of the composition because you can see how there's almost like a tension between the back two pieces of land and then the boulder in front, and the eye kind of goes at a diagonal down from the top left to the bottom right. And so that little rock in the bottom corner on the right is going to stop the eye from just falling right off of the canvas. It's like it catches the eye. And then you'll start to look around again at everything else going on in the piece. Okay, so I'm bringing in more light to my back piece of land. Still able to see that the line of the rock, I haven't got it all fogged in, but I am pushing it back by adding more light at this point because it was so foggy. I've painted fog before, but this is probably my favorite fog painting that I've done so far. So I mixed up a color kind of between the sky color and that piece of land. And I added a couple drops of water to the mixture on the palette. So it's a little bit more runny. And then I come through with my finger, and because it's more runny, I can blend it out with my finger. A lot of people would say that I should be using an acrylic medium, a clear acrylic medium, to get this transparency. So some of the color from that piece of land is coming through in a nice blended way, and then I'm bringing that foggy color up into the sky and just blurring the line of that boulder. Now the horizon is also fogged in, so I wanted to bring that foggy color over the top, also with a little bit more water in it. Not a lot of water, just a couple drops to thin it out, and then blend over that. But then I was going to lose those little rocks in the water, and I decided that because this fog is kind of temperamental and I didn't want to push it, I decided that I might just lose those rocks out in the water, and that's okay. But it takes some layering and some patience to really get this at a nice little happy place. You have to, apply your foggy color, come back through and blend it out, and just sometimes add a little bit of the color that the fog is going over again. So it's kind of like back and forth between the foggy color and the color of whatever the fog is covering. So you're not coming over with just white. It's a mix. And the more you can get it to that happy place, sometimes it takes a few tries, and it certainly did for me there. But now I have it at a pretty good spot, and you can really feel the fog. And I'm taking that sky color now, which is also my fog color, and I'm bringing it over the water so that it seems like the water is reflecting the sky. I left a little gap for a wave. And then at this point, I'm starting to notice how the water has receded back. So the tide is going out. I might have been trying to do like beach film at this point. It was working all right, but because the water had receded, there was like a strange reflection, and then the waves were coming in really thin. It was just changing a lot. So I tried to get a nice reflection on this wet sand in front, but it looked too much like the water was coming up this far. It got a little bit confusing to the eye. So I do make some corrections on this later. I just have to step back and assess, like, okay, what is actually happening? Because it's in these moments that our eyes get too focused on what's happening in the work, and we forget to step back and really process what is happening in the scene that can help us fix the painting. The rock was jutting out. There were some portions of the rock that were more receded than others, where the bottom of the rock met that wet sand. So I just made some changes down there, giving the rock a little bit more shape at the bottom. Now I have a darker color because I edited out a lot of the time that I'm down on the palette, because you can't see my palette. I mixed up a little bit darker shadow color for this muted rock, and I'm bringing in a little bit more form and shadow now, and it's starting to shape up nicely. And a little bit more of a warmer highlight for my rock in the foreground. It had more of an earthy orange to it, and I'm just following that surface of the rock, kind of like I'm a little ant, just a little tiny ant going in and out of all of those cracks and crevices, one little piece at a time. And I'm not trying to make it perfect. I just want to get a nice texture on that rock because it is closest. So the camera cut out for a while, and I ended up pretty much finishing the painting, and it's coming up in 3, 2, 1, and here we go. This is the finished painting. I did make the water line a little bit different. You can see a little bit of water at the base of my rock in the foreground. There was a little tiny puddle, some white caps on my waves, and more texture. I think this one is my favorite that I've done in Sonoma so far. Thank you so much for joining me for this painting session. I had a ton of fun. For more inspiration, I'm going to leave a related video and a playlist right here. So please check those out, and happy creating. Much love.